Have you ever had a day go by without working on your most important things? I learned in talking with McKeown even more about the importance of routines as well as constricting the input of all the things that come at me that take my attention. There's a few things walking away from this interview that I know I'm going to work on a little bit more. I hope you enjoy this time with Les. Go out and check out his website, predictablesuccess.com, and here we go. So when you start your day, Les, do you have a routine or anything that you start your day with looking out at how can I make today a successful day?
Well, I've got what I would call a Slack system, Jason, and what I mean by that is I like to make sure that I know that everything that I absolutely need to be prompted about is going to prompt me at some point. So if I need to check a bank balance or I need to go to the dentist, something that I call hard landscape,
Exactly.
it's got to be done that day, then something's going to tell me that. It's either going to be an automated email or a calendar reminder or something like that. But I put that Slack system in place with a minimal amount of prompts so that the majority of my day is left as loose as possible. I like to have really what I call a soft landscape dominate the day. I get nervous and concerned if I look at, I guess my calendar would be the primary indicator, and I see that it's too hard landscape. That's setting aside client days where I'm literally booked just for the day to do a thing. And so my morning will usually consist of me skimming. First thing in the morning will consist of me skimming those hard landscape items and just getting rid of whatever I can get rid of right away. So if I've got to go online and check a thing, if there's something that I need to do, if I need to book a ticket or something like that, I get that all done right away. And my goal is to get to completely soft landscape as soon as possible. I want to get rid of anything that I know I have to do, and that frees up the ability for me to create and essentially to write, which is what I spend most of my time doing, or consulting, coaching with clients, and trying to help them build their businesses. So I have a little set of tabs that come up in the morning, and I flick through those, and I get all of that stuff done, and then I go clear my Google Reader. There's very few. I only subscribe to maybe at any point 8 or 10 blogs or RSS feeds that I think are important, and I keep those on a competitive basis. If I see something that I want to follow for a while, I'll force myself to drop some other site off. So that only takes me like 10 minutes, and then I'm ready to go. I'm ready to do whatever it is that I want to do that day.
Les, one of the things we talk about in our online course is the different influencers to productivity, and we dive into 3 different influencers, but what you just said really makes me think of the importance of the third influencer, which is our network. And I think there's something very significant that you said that I don't want to pass by too quickly. You mentioned the fact that you are willing to follow something and let go of something because you can't, my assumption here is you can't follow everything. I think one of the traps that a lot of people that I think both of us work with is they begin to follow something, and then they begin to follow something, and then they begin to follow something, and that following could be buying books, subscribing to newsletters, getting magazine subscriptions. How do you hold yourself to that direction and that discipline, if you will?
Well, my experience, everybody else's mileage will vary, Jason, but my experience is that there are only 3 modes that I can operate on: input, output, and screensaver mode. I love screensaver mode. I try to get into it every weekend for as much of the weekend as possible. When I go on vacation, I'm on screensaver mode. In other words, there's nothing happening there. I'm a great believer in that. I think that some of the greatest stuff that I've achieved, that's the pompous phrase that I've used, but in my terms, some of the stuff that has meant most to me has come out of subliminal activity that occurs when I'm in screensaver mode. So setting that aside then, there's only two other modes. There's input and output. And for me, I know that left to my own devices, I'm an input junkie. I'll just end up inputting until my head will explode. So I don't like to do it. The reason is that I know for myself I'm lazy, and my brain will start to copy or duplicate or riff off of what other people will be saying and thinking and doing without me really even knowing about it. I think I'll come up with something that is meaningful, and then I'll realize later that all I've done is add a blue whistle to something somebody else said or did a week ago. And to be quite frank with you, I've got to the point where I try not to network. I mean, I know this sounds almost blasphemous in the current social media-dominated world, but if you go to my Twitter feed, you'll find I follow, at any point less than 80 people. If it gets up to 80, I do the same thing. I substitute one person for another person. I have no print subscriptions. I don't read business books unless I have to for a particular reason, because I want to see eternal patterns. I want to work with stuff that, if you look at my own book, Predictable Success, the majority of what evolved into that came out of observations of patterns in non-business environments. And that's just something that's important to me. I try, I used to, for example, subscribe to just about everything Seth Godin wrote. I think he's a genius. I think the man's brilliant, and I would read the back of a bus ticket if he wrote on it. But I stopped doing it because I just started writing Seth Godin stuff. But I would put my own color on it. I don't want to do that. I want to let my own brain settle into whatever it wants to do and discover whatever it wants to discover. And so I constrict my input hugely. Sometimes, just like a chocolate fiend, I'll go on an input binge, and I'll just take a couple of days and I'll soak around a whole bunch of places and get caught up in some stuff. But then I always feel bloated afterwards.
I'm kind of curious because my imagination leads me to believe that this isn't something that you just came on to. Maybe it's a new realization that you have, but one of the questions that I ask all my interviewees, Les, is, if you go back in time a little bit, and I'm always thinking in that in America it was the 7th, 8th, 9th grades. So end of junior high, early high school. You're 14, 15, 16 years old. Did you think someday, best-selling author, internationally known speaker, I'm going to be out there talking about the ideas that I have? Give us a little glimpse into kind of what was going on back then and how that relates to what you're doing now.
I certainly didn't think in those terms, Jason, at all. But what I did do was consistently imagine myself outside of the boundaries of the environments that I grew up in. I grew up in Belfast in Northern Ireland during the height of what we call the Troubles. It was a very dour place to be in. We were busy killing each other. There was zero nightlife. There was no entertainment. It was just a bleak area. If you can imagine, like if everybody just washed the color out and you lived in black and white, it was very much like that. Nothing against the place, wonderful place, mostly great people. But what I did have was a desire to see. I knew there was more to this planet than what I was seeing in East Belfast, and so I remember I used to get concerned about stuff as you would as any kid at that age, and stupid things would bother me. And I used to do this little trick. We'd walk everywhere, and I'd be walking down the street concerned about some stupid thing, and I would just have this mental picture, and I'd see this view of myself from beside me, and then that view would begin to escalate. We'd get higher and higher. I'd see myself in the street walking. Then I'd see the street in the little part of Belfast that we were in. Then I'd see Belfast. Then I'd see Northern Ireland. Then I'd see the United Kingdom. Then I'd see Western Europe. Then I'd see the globe. And I'd think, what on earth am I bothering myself with this tiny little thing about when there's so much going on? And so I had this desire always to see greater patterns and stuff. And I think that's what ultimately led to my desire, my chosen area of work as business. It could have been anything else. At one point I was on the path to become a journalist, but I ultimately decided to go into business, and I knew once I started that it was not in order to do something at a granular level. It was to try to understand what makes business tick, and that's what ultimately became the book and the teaching and speaking that I do now.
Les, what I so appreciate about the couple of stories that you shared with us today in this conversation is, as I'm listening to you, I'm recognizing and realizing the power of, I'm not going to call it habit or routine, but it's really a mindset. And just listening to that one story where you could use a technique, you could use a tool that seemed to get you from where you were to a different space, to where you were going. And, the title of your book, Predictable Success, it just seems to make sense to me that the kinds of things that you've explained here, where you've got routines, you've got these habits, you've got these things that you consistently fall back on, I might even call them practices. And so, the people listening to this later on, I hope that you'll take a couple of the ideas that Les shared and try your own practices. And like I'm a big fan of what I call the 5-day experiment. If I hear something and I think I should try that for 5 days, I'll do it consciously with awareness for 5 days in a row and then look back and say, is it worth it? Should I continue doing that? Les, thank you so much for sharing just a little bit of you. And is there a place that people could go to get a quick hit of what Les is working on these days? Or is the best thing to do to go get your book? What do you think?
Best thing to do is follow the blog, predictablesuccess.com/blog, or pick up my Twitter feed. That's Les McKeown, LESMCKEOWN, and I regularly spit out whatever it is that I'm up to at the moment, and thankfully get a lot of feedback about what's working and what isn't.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time today, Les.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.